Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. Today we're checking out 7 ways British and American pubs are very different.
In the US, this varies by state, but there's not a single one in the Union that mandates that pubs close as early as that. Hello, I'm Lawrence, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to pubs. Pubs, where would we be without them? A question that's been decisively answered in the hellscape that is 2020. In fact, while we're on the subject of the pandemic, do keep in mind, Uncle Toby, that a lot of what you're about to hear in this video might temporarily not be true. That doesn't mean that it's not ordinarily true, it just means that pubs have had to make a lot of changes on either side of the pond. And the key word there is either. I think before I moved to the United States, I was under the assumption that America didn't have pubs, but specialized instead in bars. But America does have pubs. Sometimes they'll be the kind of pubs that are looking to mimic those in Britain or Ireland. And those ones are easy to spot because they'll say something like Johnny's Irish Pub, or the Elephant and Castle in allusion to Britain's many castles and elephants. But then America does have pubs in its own right, usually called something along the lines of Merv's Tavern. And since I'm now familiar with how pubs operate in both countries, I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about 7 ways that British and American pubs are very different. So go and order yourself a pint of Foster's or Miller Lite as we order in the first round.
I like Miller Lite, I'm sorry. I know that it's super thin and not really beer, but there's something really refreshing about having a Miller Lite. Call me Miller Lite.
The story of my drinking life goes a little bit like this. At the ages of 16 and 17, I could waltz up to the bar of any British pub and order myself an absinthe. And that's not because 16 is the legal drinking age in Britain. It's because A, door security is usually pretty lax, as in there is no door security. And B, I've always looked 4 years older than I am. No, the legal drinking age in Britain is 18, so imagine my surprise on my 18th birthday when me and a few mates went to paint the town red, not literally, that's another story, and I got carded for the first time in my entire life. And the problem was I didn't have any ID with me. Fast forward 9 years, 27 years old, and I've moved to the United States of America. What's the first thing that happens as I...
He's only 27? Lawrence, have a glass of water.
But then, depending on the state, it is not unusual for people that are much older, sometimes 70 years older, to be carded at an American pub.
True.
Trust me.
I think the ATF, they send people around to bars, and they'll slap a fine on the bartender if the bartender doesn't ask for your ID.
Trust me, saw this with my own eyes. It happened to Dick Van Dyke. Of course, by then, I'd learned my lesson, and I did indeed have some ID. Ironically, I get carded a lot less these days, one of the perks of being a YouTube sensation. And 38 years old. So nationally, the legal drinking age in the United States is 21, but that hasn't always been the case. In some states, it was even once like Britain, a pub could legally serve somebody who was 18 years or older. In 1969, while Neil and Buzz were landing on the moon, teenagers could legally land themselves a glass of Blue Moon, but only in the states of Louisiana and Neil Armstrong's home state of Ohio. And then something changed. By 1975, the number of 18 states had risen to 23. This was a domino effect following the recent change of the voting age from 21 to 18. The belief being that if somebody's old enough to vote, they're old enough to drink. The problem is, legislators didn't stop to think about what would happen if these two things happened at the same time. By 1983, the numbers plummeted as states moved to increase their drinking age once more to 21. This was seen as a response to an increase in drunk driving incidents. The domino effect was complete in 1984, when President Ronald Reagan signed into law the National Minimum Drinking Age Act, which outlawed the purchase of alcohol by individuals under the age of 21. In 2020, 1 or 2 parental loopholes notwithstanding, the legal drinking age remains 21 in all US states and territories except Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands, where it's 18.
Okay, so when I was 18, the drinking age in Louisiana was 18. And I know that because the summer after I graduated high school, my parents took me to Louisiana and bought me a bunch of alcohol, legally. And it was really weird, because for years they told me not to drink. And then all of a sudden they're saying, here, have a hurricane. It was strange. And then we drove back to Florida and everything went back to normal.
pubs, what are they good for? Well, the answer to that question could be different depending on which country you are in. I mean, sure, in both countries, one of the chief aims of pubs is to give customers a place to get pissed until the cows come home. And if you've ever been drinking with me, that happens regularly. But the main difference here lies in their purpose in the middle of the day. In Britain, if we go to the pub in the middle of the day, often this can take on a quiet but social tone. We just go to talk over a pint. In a way, it's like how Americans go and grab a coffee. Why am I saying it like that?
Coffee.
One country emerges from this scenario drunk on caffeine, the other drunk on the street. Apart from that, it's the same thing. If you go into the pub in the middle of the day in America, you can usually expect that to be coupled with a sporting event. And that doesn't mean you yourself get drunk and start playing polo. It means you enter a pub that's simultaneously showing about 28 different sports.
Right.
In order to do that, said pub would need to have a of these. That's right, in America, the term sports bar is almost redundant, though I'm finding firsthand the same is not true of the term sports bra. Don't ask, one word, tequila. But the reason that the term sports bar ought to be redundant is that just about every pub and bar in America is worthy of that title.
Yeah.
In other words, it's incredibly common to walk into an establishment and be surrounded by television sets.
Very true.
And these television sets don't typically show repeats of Happy Days, but of the Cubs losing, or at least when I'm around. In British pubs, you will occasionally find a TV, but the emphasis is not on consuming television, but rather on consuming alcohol and the words of your friends. That sounded weird. Earlier in the video, I joked that we ourselves don't play sports while down at the pub, but in either country this isn't strictly true. Of course, in Britain this depends on whether or not you class darts as a sport, especially when you're at the pub because you've got a drink in your hand, which I've just realised is also true of professional darts players. Either way, darts are an incredibly popular sport in British pubs. In American pubs, even though you will occasionally encounter the odd dartboard, sometimes very odd dartboard, they're just not as big a part of the pub-going experience.
No.
And when you think about the sentence, drunk people throwing sharp objects, that probably makes sense.
In America, you'll see dartboards hanging on the wall, but almost never is anyone actually playing darts. It's more like a decoration. It's more for the pub atmosphere.
I'm often reminded of those stories of American tourists who enter a British pub, sit at a table and wait on a waiter to wait for them. Here's the truth. You could be waiting a long time because unlike the United States, British pubs tend not to employ table service. And this can be a problem, particularly when the pub is heaving in the sense of crowded, not throwing up. You want to make sure you get a seat. I understand that, right? So here's what you do. If you're there in a group, one of you go up to the bar while the rest of you claim the seat. The one at the bar orders all of the drinks and then it's his or her responsibility to carry them to the table. Just don't use the term double fisting. In America, things are different. Even during the Super Bowl, which is not a national dish, you can fully expect to receive table service in most pubs throughout the land. Of course, this could be partially dictated by the tipping culture that exists in America. And fellow Brits, that's not the same thing as fly tipping. At the end of the day, we go to the pub to get absolutely rat-arsed or to have a casual drink. And so to some degree, it's going to vary from country to country as to what is on tap. There are some crossovers and I dare say some exceptions to what I'm about to say. But there are lots of differences in the beers that are served, and this can vary from pub to pub or even region to region. Any pub, British or American, worth their salt will feature a comprehensive list of local beers. Naturally, these are going to be different between Britain and America, but also between regions within each of those countries.
Yeah.
But then you get down to the big names too. In Britain, you're far more likely to be ordering the Australian beer Foster's than you are Samuel Adams. If that's not your bag, there's always Carlsberg or Carling. In America, Budweiser or Miller Lite.
When I went to England, we went to this pub called the Eclipse. We went to several other pubs too. The only American beer they had was Budweiser. And that's like the worst one. We know it tastes like crap. Miller Lite's better.
There's always Carlsberg or Carling. In America, Budweiser or Miller Lite. And if you want one that unites the two countries, you could go for the Belgian beer Stella Artois.
Stella gives me stomach cramps.
which in Britain is trashy and in the US it's classy. And then of course there's the pint size itself. Let me go back in time and hand you over to Lawrence from a few months ago. Great Britain might be unfairly known for its warm beer, but at least you get more bang for your buck, or should I say quid. You see, a British pint is larger than its American counterpart. To some, that might sound like something that I cooked up after, 4 pints of Stella, especially since each country defines a pint as 1/8 of a gallon. But here's the catch. Gallons are different too. In the US, a gallon is equal to 3.79 litres. In Britain, it's equal to 4.55 litres. So 1/8 of a US gallon gives you a pint of 473 millilitres. So a good old British pint clocks in at 568.
What the heck?
And this is great news for American beer fans in Britain because it means that 6 American pints are equal to 5 British ones. You'll be slaughtered before the pub quiz starts.
How is that fair? Why don't we have the bigger pints? How did we f*** that up? Let's get on the right track, America.
Aside from the fact that you now have a particular song stuck in your head, you're probably asking the question, what's the difference between British and American closing times? You see, in Britain, right up until about 2005, it was mandated that pubs had to close at 11 p.m. On the one hand, you could get around this by starting your drinking session earlier, say at 7 o'clock in the morning. On the other, given the time difference, you couldn't stay around long enough to watch wrestling pay-per-views. But then in 2005, a law was passed that said that pubs could stay open 24 hours so long as they had a specific license. But by all accounts, it looks like most British pubs haven't applied for this license because they still shut at 11 p.m. In the US, this varies by state, but there's not a single one in the Union that mandates that pubs close as early as that. In fact, 27 states in the Union permit their pubs to stay open until 2 a.m. And it's usually at that time, after tequila, that my voice really does sound like that. Now, there are some notable exceptions to this rule. Alaska and Hawaii are to drinking times what Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands are to the legal drinking age. In other words, they're so far away from the mainland they can sort of get away with it. What can they get away with? Staying open until 4 and 5 a.m. There are state and local exceptions to those rules just in case you were thinking of moving to either of those states. That's closing time on this episode. Let me know in the comments below your experiences of pubs in either country.
Very different vibe between an English pub and an American bar. And I feel like the table service that American bars have sometimes probably keeps us from interacting with our neighbors and other people who are at the bar or pub. Even just the logistics of an English pub, the way it works, is going to force people to come together and have to tolerate each other and have to talk and coexist. I'm into this British pub culture, y'all. This is fascinating. We gotta help it spread around the world, even in countries where alcohol is illegal. We can do it. We can do it. Really good video. Thank you guys for suggesting. If you have any other suggestions, let me know in the comments. I'll see you guys next time.